Hi, everyone, and welcome to Middle East Breakdown. On ME24 with you is Hayvi Bouzo, co-founder and co-editor of Middle East 24. And today we're going to be unpacking the situation that is developing around the designations of the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations. We first have an executive order by President Trump that calls to investigate different branches of the Muslim Brotherhood. But we're going to be talking about the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. What are they doing in the West? How they're infiltrating the minds and hearts of younger generations in the West, and also the reality of the Middle East. What have they done in the Middle East? What do they actually want to achieve? And ways to counter that and understand that type of terrorist supporting organization. And also, we're going to talk about the Iranian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood influence on the Iranian regime and vice versa. Of course, we're going to talk about Hezbollah and Hezbollah's role in Lebanon as the most powerful Iranian-backed terrorist proxy. Also, the developments that are happening in Lebanon in regards to Hezbollah and what does it mean for the future of the region and for the West. Because as we know, what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East, and that there is an impact. That what happens here influences there, and what happens there influences us here. Joining me to discuss all of these really important topics is Hussain Abdul-Hussain, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD. Hussain is a leading expert on Lebanon, Iranian influence, Islamist movements, and Gulf issues. He's also going to bring us a historical depth and clarity for today's most urgent security challenges. Before we begin, I want to ask you all to follow us on ME24 on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and to subscribe to Middle East Breakdown on your favorite podcast platform and give us the best rating. And please continue watching and listening to Middle East Breakdown, because we're going to always give you the most insight, deep analysis, stories, uncovered issues that are developing in the Middle East and that are impacting us here in the West. It's wonderful to finally have you, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, with us on Middle East Breakdown on ME24.
Thanks for having me on, Hayvi.
We have a lot to unpack today, and I know that our audience are just always interested to learn and understand more about these complex issues that are happening in the Middle East, that are now happening here, and how all of this impacts our day-to-day life here as Americans, people who are in the West. And one of the big issues that is basically now a main topic, a hot topic, is Muslim Brotherhood, who they are, their ideology, the designations that we're seeing. And I couldn't ask a better expert about this. Can we try to unpack the Muslim Brotherhood? First of all, who are they? Because for many people, they kind of like, they seem vague. They wear suits, they participate in governments, they play the role of the so-called opposition in some countries, right? But are they just ISIS with a suit on?
Well, these are great questions. Let me start by a bit of history by saying that the whole thing started in 1799 when Napoleon landed in Egypt, and this is the first time in a while that these Muslims of the Middle East and Egypt and North Africa, this is the first time that they come in contact with the West, and they noticed that a huge gap had opened up between a very advanced West and themselves being left behind. And the debate started, and in this debate, these Muslims were split into two teams. The first team said that we should reform Islam and drop the verses and interpretations and Islamic teachings and ideas that keep us back, and replace them with modern Western thinking from the age of enlightenment, such as life and liberty and equality, the founding principles of the American and French Revolution. On the other hand, you had another team that said, well, the reason we're backward is because Muslims stopped practicing Islam in its pure form, in its 7th century form. So they said, when we practice Islam in its original form during the days of the Prophet and the Rashidun caliphs, we conquered the world and we established an empire. But when we veered away from Islam, then we fell behind, and that's why the West is ahead. So these are the two schools that started roughly around the year 1800. The first 100 years or so, the reformists were ahead, and these produced some secular literature, secular leadership, secular dictators, and secular parties and ideologies. But eventually, these guys did not deliver, and the wind started blowing in the other direction until around the 1930s, 20s, 30s. This is when Hassan al-Banna in Egypt showed up, and he produced all this literature. And by the 1950s, 1960s, when Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser was a secular guy and he was an Arab nationalist, he started confronting the Muslim Brotherhood that the Hassan al-Banna had put together. And this is where the schism started becoming stronger. Now, 1979 is the date where there was a reversal in fortunes. The seculars had weakened enormously. So the Muslim Brotherhood, the Shia section of the Muslim Brotherhood, took over in Iran. The Sunni Muslim Brotherhood started surging in Saudi Arabia and other spots in Afghanistan, especially to counter the Soviet invasion. Of course, the Western camp was in favor of having religion, which is Islam, counter atheism, which is communism. Little did the West know at the time that this will come back at us to bite us. So this is roughly how things started. Now, one last thing about the Muslim Brotherhood. It is very similar to communism in a sense that it's an ideology. So the Muslim Brotherhood that was established by Hassan Banna, it's a global ideology. It's transnational. It's across nations, and it exists in several parties and names. So if you say that we are going to sanction the Muslim Brotherhood, that's not good enough, because any 5 people who read Hassan al-Banna can put up an organization and call it the Brotherhood Muslim, and this will evade our sanctions. So the point here is that all these iterations, whether it's the HTS of Ahmad al-Shara al-Julani in Syria, or whether it's ISIS, and these are the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood organization, and by Muslim Brotherhood we mean the ideology, or whether it's the Shia, and for those who don't know, the current supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, is the person who translated the works of Hassan al-Banna of the Muslim Brotherhood from Arabic to Persian. So this is, as this is an indication of the extent of how much Khamenei himself was influenced by
Wow.
the Muslim Brotherhood, by Hassan al-Banna, and how he turned this into a Shia ideology as well.
So yeah, so basically what you're saying is that even the Khomeinism is based on the Muslim Brotherhood ideology?
So that's a great question, Hayvi. Let us just say, because I gave the history, but I didn't say what they want.
Yes.
What does the Muslim
That's important.
what does the Muslim Brotherhood, whether it's Sunni or the Shia equivalent, want? They think that Western government, based on the ideas of enlightenment, and we said life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality, fraternity, these concepts are degenerate. These concepts go against the divine instructions of religion, especially the Islamic religion. And they think that these concepts are inferior to the concepts that were given to human beings through Islam. So the best form of government, according to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, is Islam in politics, Islam as a state. They're not talking about Islam in the mosque, or Islam in like, pray and fast. This you can do. There are at least a billion people who do this every day. This doesn't mean that these Muslims are automatically an Islamic government. What the Muslim Brotherhood wants to see is that they want the political dimensions of Islam to be enforced and applied to government, and not only their own government, for example, the government of Turkey and Qatar, which are Islamist at this point, but they want this applied everywhere. Europe, Western Europe, North America, liberal democracies, autocracies, Russia, China. So they just want everyone to become an Islamic government.
Okay, so yeah, they do have the kind of world domination view that like there's a supreme Islamic ummah that dominates everyone in the world.
Absolutely. And remember that during the time when they were put together, which was the early 1900s, they were also competing with the communism and the Marxist ideology. And we all know that Marxist ideology is transnational.
Exactly, which it
They
isn't
call it
mean that
international.
they want to impose that ideology onto the world.
Yes, so they roughly borrowed from the Marxism. So, because we know that the history of Islam is proud of invading and colonizing other nations. So they added a dimension to Islamic thinking, to the Islamic government, in that they consider themselves also to be the impoverished and what the Iranians call the downtrodden, compared to the arrogant powers of the West. So, and this is what makes it very easy for people in the West, for these students on U.S. campuses, U.S. university campuses, to mix the two. It's very easy to mix a Muslim Brotherhood thinking, the Islamist thinking, and the Marxist communist thinking. They're very similar. The only difference is that one of them considers itself to be atheist, the other one considers itself to be Muslim.
Yeah, and they are basically kind of collaborating in the West, specifically. They're working together against the West itself.
Well, from their perspective, it makes sense. Now, I think both of them think that they can cooperate at this point, and maybe later when they topple liberal democracies and when they weaken America and the West and the empires, then they can knock the other out. And we saw this. We saw this.
Strategy of my enemy is my friend. As
Yes,
well, they turn against each other. But the thing is that like people here don't realize that people like us who've lived, I mean, I was born and raised under a socialist, corrupt, bloody regime that also empowered Islamist extremist groups. And it's like two hells, you're living in literally a double hell.
it is absolutely, absolutely. By the way, hey, this is how the Hitler came to power, right? The Nazis, when they won election, they didn't want a majority; they won a big bloc, and only because the socialists and the communists of Lenin supported them. So the two of them grabbed power together, and then the Nazis kicked the communists out of power. So this is roughly how it happened in Germany. Yeah, I wouldn't say that this is exactly what they have in mind in the West right now. But now in the West, they see themselves both against capitalism, against liberal democracies, against the concept of liberty. Now, let me make just one thing very clear between what liberal democracies have and what these Islamists and communists think. Liberal democracies are built on the idea that the most important cornerstone of society and government is the concept of liberty. The other guys, whether you're socialist, communist, or Muslim Brotherhood, Islamist, they don't look at the person as a person. They look at the person as part of a collective. So the collective is also put or given a priority. And this means when the collective is more important than the person, then the person can just shut up and follow. So this is why on the Islamist and the communist side, you will not see debate or support of liberty or support of democracy, even though what they do is that they exploit our endorsement and support of freedom of expression. And this takes us exactly to where LGBTQ support Hamas, and Hamas are enjoying the support. And Hamas is saying all the time, if there's freedom of expression, then you should grant us the freedom to express ourselves as Hamas. But in Hamas land, there's never freedom of expression. So they abuse it on our side of the world. And they never
tend to embrace liberal democracies when they're the opposition or the ones who are claiming to be a part of whatever movement that they're hijacking. But then when they are in power, the truth comes out. You as a
absolutely.
person have no right to worship freely, to be who you are, to think, to speak, all the things that we cherish and enjoy in the West.
Absolutely, absolutely, and especially diversity, and yeah, to them they use it as a Trojan horse. Look, I mean, since we're talking about the West and these Islamists and Arab Americans, let me just point out that whether they know it or not, the Arab Americans and the Muslim Americans are a different beast compared to the actual Arabs who live over there and the Muslims who live over there. So even though Arab Americans think that they are actually Arabs, or or they have the same problems or the same issues. They're totally different. The Arab Americans and the Muslim Americans have a different experience. They have different expectations and do things differently. And they wouldn't last a day if they move over there. Their imagination is about a romantic place. So for example, if we take all these people who are saying Palestine all the time, try to find one word about how this Palestine looks when it's established, other than, of course, destroying all of Israel and, deporting the Jews or killing them or getting rid of them. But what does Palestine look? Is there any pamphlet or book or article or anything that says Palestine will be a country based on liberty and equality and no, there's none. There's nothing. They just say, give us land and give us our grandparents' mud huts. Okay, but then what?
Yeah. And the
So
examples speak for themselves too, in terms of what happened so far in
yes,
Palestinian controlled areas, which is really sad for the Palestinians, but that's just the reality. Corruption, oppression, Islamist, extremist, terrorist group. I mean,
absolutely. And this is why people like me would always say, listen, we have to identify our goals. What do we want to get to? To me, the most important thing for Palestinians and Arabs and any human being really is the basic rights, liberty and equality and freedom of expression. And number two, living standards. And only after these, you start thinking of sovereignty or other political concerns. It doesn't make sense for any human to put political concerns on top of personal interest. So, and this is the Maslow triangle. Number one, we have to eat and clothe ourselves, and then we have to enjoy our personal liberty. And after that, we start thinking of organizing ourselves into political parties and stuff. The way they have it, these Islamists and socialists and communists over there, and also over here, is the reverse. Okay, we want sovereignty for Palestine. Well, great, but then what? What will happen to people? And judging by the experiment that these people have put forward, whether it's the Palestinian Authority, the corrupt and failing Palestinian Authority, or the Islamist tyrannical and also corrupt Hamas, there's no experiment that's really encouraging to say, listen, they've done a great job. Look at the model that they present. Let them have a state because they've shown that they deserve one. Even if, whether it's a right or not, this is different. But having something as a right does not guarantee that you will know what to make of it. And I think this is a debate that's not happening, in that part of the world or in this part of the world where, people just support blindly and shout from the river to the sea without even realizing what it means.
yeah. And, this is definitely, I think, a very important conversation. I think we need to have so much more of it because there is a lot of disconnect. And you brought a very good point about the disconnect, even among Arabs and Muslims in the West, from the Arabs and Muslims who are living in the Middle East, because the ones who lived in the Middle East have experienced and suffered under the rule of these elements that are trying right now to brainwash younger generations here in the West, except the ones here have no idea what it's actually like to live under these types of forces. Pure evil. And comes from people who are from there, right? Like we've lived through this. But there is a point, and you've actually answered to this one time in one of our lives on Visegrad 24, when you said that there is a distinction between Islam and Islamism. Sometimes because of all of the destruction that we see, the mass killings that we've seen over and over again in terrorist attacks, some people could literally feel like this is a problem that is just Islam is fundamentally the problem. And there's no such a thing of coexisting with Islam. While others say, and I agree with you on this, no, there is the Islamic extremists and there are Muslims. And so there's the good, normal, like just Muslim who's practicing their faith, but also want to coexist with other people. And there's the Islamic extremist that is either trying to pretend that their ideology is harmless in the beginning to fool other people, and infiltrating people that way, or that are actually going out there and killing other people because they are Islamic extremists, and that's what they believe, that other people should just be killed for being Jewish, for being Christian, for being Muslim but not agreeing with their ideology, which we've seen happen a lot over and over again.
Well, that's a great point. Let me start by saying that every text in the history of civilization is what you make of it. Even if you're a patriotic American like myself, and we think that our Constitution is a marvelous piece of art, right? Enlightened, written by smart people at the time, still stands today. Even our Constitution, we have a Supreme Court that from time to time interprets what the founders meant or what legislators 100 or 150 years ago meant when they legislated a certain law that was only 5 lines or maybe 15 lines. Any text in the world can be interpreted in so many ways. You move a comma and it changes the whole meaning of the text. So take this and apply it to a book written presumably 1400 years ago. The language is different, the meanings are different. And over these past 1400 years, we have had an accumulation of interpretations that all these Islamic sects over all this time have come up with so many different interpretations. So at this point, the Quran, and which is the basis of Islam, and the Islam Quran is God's word, and nothing can disagree with the Quran. Fine, but then you have to understand what the Quran says so that you wouldn't disagree with it. In the process of understanding what it says, you can come up with hundreds of meanings, and this is a process that's still ongoing. So this is why I say a text is what you make of it, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the New Testament, you name it. You take the text, you look at it, and then you decide. And then the debate that I was telling you about, these reformers in Islam, after Napoleon in the year 1800, they said there are some verses that most likely apply to the time of the Prophet himself, to the 7th century, and they do not apply to our time anymore. So we can just abrogate these verses. And in Islam, abrogation, you just take a verse and you say, this is canceled, this doesn't count. And it exists. There are so many verses in the Quran that you can read them. For example, there are some verses that allow the consumption of alcohol. And they say, these were earlier verses, and eventually Islam prohibited alcohol. So the earlier verses were abrogated. So this dynamic way of dealing with the text allows reformers space to say, look, this says kill the Jews, but this applied to a specific incident in the 7th century when 2 tribes, one of them Muslim, one of them Jewish, had a fallout for whatever reason. And this doesn't really apply to our situation today. So if you do that, then all these verses that people consider to be incitement will stop applying. Thankfully, the majority of Muslims around the world consider these verses that call on Muslims to apply violence against non-Muslims. They consider them to be non-valid at this point. Yeah, I think the biggest majority of Muslims, of the 1.5 billion, 2 billion, I'm not sure which number we agree on these days, but the greatest majority of these people does not look at these verses as if there are instructions to apply them today. They look at pray 5 times, fast 30 days of Ramadan, go to Mecca at least once in your lifetime. It's a spiritual journey like every other religion, and you're supposed to practice it for self-relief, for meditation, to become a better person, and to become for whole society to become a bunch of better people. And many Muslims I know, and you probably also know Hayvi, my mother is one of them. I have some, her sisters, my cousins, a whole bunch of people that I grew up with. They are practicing Muslims. None of them had ever slapped anyone on the face. None of them would like to see any kind of violence. To just say that the minute you endorse Islam, it makes you a violent person, this disagrees with everything that we know. And this lumps 1.5 billion Muslim into one giant category of violent people. And this makes our confrontation of Islamism, of political Islam, near impossible. And this makes it easier for Islamism to spread, because the Islamists will say, see, they don't see a difference between you, the moderate, and me, the crazy dude, the violent crazy dude. So see, you have to join us, because they don't see the difference anyway. So a smart policy would be to say, if you practice Islam like any other religion, good for you. If you're a law-abiding citizen, tax-paying citizen, we will never knock on your door. You'll be just like anybody of us. But if you think that you will bring Islam to government and bring Islamic instructions to public space and to government, then we have a problem. Then we have to keep you out, and then we have to go back to our own constitution, the U.S. Constitution, that says, God is on one side and the government is on the other side, and they shouldn't be mixing together. So, and this is, by the way, this is not secularism, because many Arabs think this is secularism. Secularism actually goes after religion and takes it out. The American model doesn't say that you have to be secular. It says that you separate. So separation of church and state is not exactly like secularism.
In my knowledge, secularism is basically that separation of church and state, and people have the rights to worship freely, right?
So
what is the difference?
So secularism is a bit further away than separation of church and state. So we in the US separate church and state. And if you come wearing whatever you're wearing, a hijab, and you come to a public pool or any public place, or if you're a student with a hijab and you go to public school, we're fine with that as Americans, right? We think this is your freedom of expression and worship. In France, it doesn't work this way. If you are going to go to public school and you're wearing a hijab as a young Muslim student, the state is secular. So the state secularizes it, takes out religion. It erases religion from the public space. In the US, we do not erase religion, but we do not recognize religion as instructing our policy, politics, or state. So the difference, there's a slight difference, but a country like France or Turkey in the past, now Turkey is, on the other side, but in the past, Turkey was like this. You couldn't be a woman and wear hijab and go to public university or public school or work for the state. So secularism is a bit a step further than where we are in the US. And I personally prefer our American system, So you want to be a hijabi woman, good for you. Just don't ask me for perks for it. Don't say, well, because I'm hijabi, I want to do this to public space. I want to segregate the sexes at the pool or in public school. Now that's too much. So that's now you're bringing religion onto
You're enforcing your ideology upon us.
Yes, exactly. Now this becomes Islamism. But if you just want to have your hijab and jump in the pool, that's you,
What about niqab, by the way? Like, this is another level that, like, I think it's like a security concern. I really think that niqab should, like, be forbidden because of the fact that you cannot identify a person under this. How could you even, like, check them in the airport or even allow them to go into a school? And you can't even see their face. You can't identify them. I mean, that's like a sensitive topic, but
Look, I agree. And I think if you are a Muslim and you decide to practice Islam in its most austere form and interpretation, and when you do that, it means that a woman should not be recognized in public space. And which means that if you don't want to be recognized, then you better stay at home, right? And there are times in Islamic history, in certain dynasties or kingdoms, for example, the Fatimids of Egypt, or when women were really just thrown in prison at home. They were imprisoned at home for the
kind of like
duration of their lives.
today.
Yeah. So if you want, So if you're a woman, you're just born and die in your own house. And the only time you get out of your house is when you get out of your father's house to your husband's house. And that's it. So if this is what you want to practice, fine, stay home. But if
Yeah.
you want to practice this and at the same time come to us and say, you can't see my face, well, we're sorry. If you're part of society, you have to be recognized and
Like
identified.
niqab is, covering women's face completely, just to
Exactly.
audience know.
If I don't know who you are, how can I grant you your rights as a citizen, right? I mean, because you are demanding rights as everybody else. As a citizen, as a law-abiding citizen, you have the right to use a car, go to the airport, go to a school, but you're hiding your face. How can I grant you these rights if I can't recognize your face? So I agree with you. In the case of covering the face, I think it should be, give them the choice. Either stay in your house for the rest of your life, or when you decide to show your face, you're most welcome to join society and, the country you live in.
Wow. Okay, so like when we talk, and let's talk about the designations, because we did discuss kind of the difference between what is happening, let's say, in the Middle East versus in the West. And we saw that there's an exploitation of the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamists of Western democracies, liberal democracies, all of these rights that are granted for people to worship, to organize, to fundraise, all of these things, um, to basically fund these Islamist extremist elements that are destroying and killing innocent people just across the ocean from us. And of course, they're trying to empower, even to sway our own politicians and infiltrate our institutions in different ways. But finally, and I think that's what's really important, is that we're seeing now the designations of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I would love to kind of unpack this, because we know that there's the executive orders by President Trump that talks about investigating the Muslim Brotherhood in all Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. I would like to know what you think about that. What does it mean? Because like you said, okay, so if they're called Brotherhood Muslims, then now they're not sanctions, right, in the U.S. But also we're seeing the designation by states, which is a different layer right now, starting by Texas and now Florida, against the Muslim Brotherhood. What does that mean? How is that different, of course, from the executive order, which focuses more internationally, not talking about the domestic aspect? I think it's important to focus on the domestic aspect, because, like CARE, how could CARE continue to fundraise? And we know that CARE is a Muslim Brotherhood associated, infiltrated, dominated organization that also played a major role in electing Mamdani to be a mayor in New York. So let's unpack this.
Um, of course, yeah. So we have two tools to confront danger in terms of ideology. One of them was the way we stood up to communism. We counter communism, and we put all communist governments in one basket. And we said, okay, if you are communist or you want to be connected to the Soviet Union or communism, you're on our blacklist, and we will keep our eyes on you at all times. This included governments. It included, non-government organizations, individuals. Uh, so this is how we dealt with communism as a global episode, and eventually, thankfully, America prevailed. The other tool after communism, after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and communism, what we had to deal with mainly with Islamists were non-governmental, non-government violent organizations. Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, this and that. And because these violent organizations were not states, and that's why we call them terrorism. Now, terrorism is when a non-state actor practices violence. That's what terrorism is.
Yes.
And that's why we never call a state terrorist. So, for example, we never call Iran a terrorist state. We call it a state sponsor of terrorism.
Yes.
Once you're a state, you can't be terrorist.
Mhm.
What you see with the Muslim Brotherhood is a combination of the two. On one hand, you have governments that are the biggest sponsors of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, such as Turkey and Qatar. And on the other hand, you have organizations that are maybe supported by Turkey and Qatar, but that are not really a state, like the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan, which is supported by Turkey and Qatar, but it's in Sudan, it's in a different country. Or, during communism, we had a similar issue. For example, we had the Soviet Union, but then we had the Communist Party of Lebanon. And Lebanon was not a communist country, but there was a Communist Party in Lebanon connected to the Soviet Union. So what we did was that we put the whole ideology on the blacklist, whether it's the government or the organizations connected to these governments. The designations you just asked about, Hayvi, deal with organizations, and they don't go far enough, so they don't go after the governments that are sponsoring these organizations. So until this point, Qatar, which is by far the biggest sponsor of Islamist ideology and activism, and you name it, around the globe, is still not touched. And let me just explain when I said Muslim Brotherhood and Brotherhood Muslim. For example, Yusuf Qaradawi, he was a famous guy for those who observe and monitor the Middle East. He was an Egyptian guy with the Muslim Brotherhood. And in the 1960s, when Nasser really cranked things up on the Muslim Brotherhood, these guys went into exile. And Yusuf Qaradawi went into Doha, and Doha was barely a few mud huts at the time. And he lived in Doha all this time. And he spread the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, whether through schools or, organizations. Now, Yusuf Qaradawi died a few years ago. His son is still there, maybe not as charismatic as the father. But when he was alive, and for those who don't know who Yusuf Qaradawi is, he's famous because when America had troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, he issued a fatwa in which he said that Muslims can kill U.S. troops. So this is his claim to fame. But anyway,
He had a show on Al Jazeera. He had like
a guy on Azira, exactly.
Yeah, he has his own show just preaching terrorism from Al Jazeera.
That guy. So, but Yusuf Qaradawi does not call himself Muslim Brotherhood anymore. What he did was that he established something that he called Al-Ittihad Al-Alami Li'Ulama Al-Muslimin, the International Union for Muslim Scholars. And this union, which is based in Doha, has a huge office in Istanbul, in Turkey, has offices across the world. And this organization is now working in a way that's exactly the Muslim Brotherhood, the ideology, the thinking, the support, the soft power, except that where's Al-Ittihad Al-Alami Al-Ulama Al-Muslimin on our designation list? Show me. I mean,
You're right.
just, yeah, where are they? I mean, okay, we classified Muslim Brotherhood, but where are these guys? Take Sudan, another example. In Sudan, there was the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's weakened and it's split into two factions. So you have two Muslim Brotherhood organizations in Sudan that are rival factions. But the point is that both are small organizations when compared to the big Sudanese Islamic movement, which was established by people like Qaradawi, people who were Muslim Brotherhood 30, 40 years ago, but then eventually they established something on their own. And now the Sudanese Islamic movement is a huge problem and a big issue, but it's not called the Muslim Brotherhood. So if we designate the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan, we will get these two small shops, but we will miss the big picture. And the same applies to, when we designate, look, the Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon is not an issue. No, the only reason...
Why were they included in the executive order by President Trump?
Why? I don't want to explain intentions and what happened, what might have happened behind the scenes. But what I know is that the Muslim Brotherhood of Lebanon will become a problem if we do not stop Turkey and Qatar from supporting and sponsoring them. So until this minute, they're not a problem yet because Lebanon was dominated by the Assad dynasty, which is against the Muslim Brotherhood, as we all know, the Alawite regime. And Hezbollah dominated Lebanon. Hezbollah is Shia Islamism and wouldn't really concede its territory to Sunni Muslims. So the Muslim Brotherhood has been suppressed for a long, long time in Lebanon. And the Sunnis of Lebanon, through the Hariri dynasty, were under the sponsorship of Saudi Arabia, and they were very moderate. Now, the Saudi leadership in Lebanon collapsed, the Hariri dynasty ended, and now you have Sunnis who are freelancing. And with Assad being knocked out and Hezbollah weakened, where will these Sunnis go? Now, these Sunnis are now going and gravitating toward the Muslim Brotherhood as sponsored by Qatar and Turkey, and they are surging in Lebanon.
Yeah.
Hoping to
And we
replace
saw some videos. We saw some videos of that.
Exactly.
We're talking about there's a video that was published, and they were angry that that video was removed. It was against Christmas or against the Christians. It was like, and they were like saying it on camera that they are not, they did not want this video to be removed. I'm like, oh my God, I did not see that coming. You know, like that Sunnis in Tripoli, Lebanon, are now basically openly are preaching radicalism, Islamic radicalism. So is that Turkey and Qatar's influence?
Yes, and a more scientific yardstick to measure the surge in Muslim Brotherhood thought in Lebanon is to look at the results from the municipal election held earlier this year in Lebanon, in which you could see that the Qatar and Turkey candidates swept north of Lebanon, where that video came from, Tripoli, and they won at least half of Beirut, of the Sunni bloc in Beirut. So you can see measurably that the Muslim Brotherhood thinking is on the rise, thanks to Turkey and Qatar. And of course, on December 8th, all these, Muslim Brotherhood types in Lebanon took to the street waving Sharia's flag. So now they feel empowerment because they think that, the Muslim Brotherhood has taken over in Syria. So now, they have someone, a big brother really close by with which they can beat the rivals, the Shia Hezbollah and the Shia Islamist. But my point here is that until now, the Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon is not a real threat. And it beats me why we put them, but we didn't put Ittihad al-Alami Ulama al-Muslimin from Qatar and Turkey. I mean, this organization, Qaradawi's organization, is by far much more dangerous to United States national interest and to the Western model of government. And this is then the Muslim Brotherhood of Lebanon. Muslim Brotherhood of Lebanon would be the puppet in the hands of Ittihad al-Alam. So I think we went after the small guy and really didn't touch the problem.
So let's talk about it. Our administration has been very soft on Turkey and Qatar, the Trump's administration. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, look, I'll talk about Qatar. I'm not really an expert about Turkey, and Turkey is a NATO member, so God knows what the calculus is. But Qatar is really buying influence lock, stock, and barrel. Not only in Washington and in Brussels, and Paris, and Berlin, and London, and Beirut, and Tehran, and everywhere. So Qatar is a wave of money and influence that's just sweeping everyone. And this could probably have affected the calculus of whoever was working on the designations. Again, I didn't talk to anyone in the administration who told me how they manufactured these designations, how made them happen, how they produced them. But again, if you watch the Turning Point conference, the conservatives over the past few days, you could see clearly that there was division over Qatar, which would have never happened 5 years ago inside the Republican Party. But for the first time now, you hear voices inside the conservative movement, inside the MAGA movement, that's praising Qatar as an indispensable ally. And such a characterization really, really, really beats me as a close observer of Qatar. I think Qatar is the source, is where Islamism begins and ends, is where the Muslim Brotherhood begins and ends. Qatar is the country that broadcasts all of Osama bin Laden's videos and tapes, even though we, America, begged them. We said, listen, we have our troops in Afghanistan, and any one of these videos could be signals to his fighters to kill American troops. And of course, Al Jazeera said, no, take a hike. So I just can't see how we don't see all this Islamist extremism danger coming from Qatar and also from Turkey, but especially from Qatar. So why is the Qatari organization off of the designation list? Why are some conservative voices going to Qatar and saying we'll buy houses there and saying, this should be our best ally? All of this doesn't make sense to me.
In this case, that's Tucker Carlson, who's, in my opinion, one of the most anti-American conservatives, quote unquote, that I've ever seen. Like we have now like a kind of a split off from conservative, Americans that is very anti-American, anti-Semitic, pro all the dictatorship regimes in the world. Somebody like Tucker Carlson is definitely an embodiment of all of that. In my own personal opinion, just watching what he's talking about, what he stands for, how he appeases very evil regimes and leaders of these evil regimes, while he's like so harsh on America all the time. And now he's buying a property in Qatar. I mean, not surprising at all. And we know that Qatar is putting a lot of money. There's a lot of money that's coming out of Qatar. And what you mentioned in terms of Al Jazeera, like Osama bin Laden's videos, and now this is not only in Arabic anymore, it's now in English. I mean, this is the same ideology. They're obviously a lot more subtle in English, but they're definitely like spreading this ideology in a way that will fit into the mind of a Westerner who wouldn't know the layers, right? And they would try to also talk about like whatever grievances that are in the West and capitalize on that. The same thing they did with Muslims, right? Or Arabs in general, in Arab countries. So in terms of Qatar, it's a major non-NATO ally, unlike Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally. And I'm sure this kind of like in the US has one of its biggest military bases in Qatar, maybe because the Trump administration is all about, making deals, making agreements, not wanting to get more involved, more engaged. But in your opinion, can we actually confront and designate these Islamic extremist organizations, individuals, under different names? Let's say whatever name they might put on, right? In a way that is systematic, that will weaken them in the West and in the Middle East, where it's not about, it's not anti-Muslim, it's anti-Islamic extremist organizations that have destroyed this part of the world and are trying to destroy the West today.
First, about Tucker or any other person, I avoid assessing these people or anybody else. I mean, my ethos should always be
This is just me personally.
yeah, don't judge lest you be judged. And whether it's Tucker or Rachel Maddow or anybody else, I will be happy to discuss their policies. And I disagree with what Tucker is saying. But whether he likes to buy a house in Doha or in Baghdad or anywhere, that's his business.
So you like
Yeah, of course, that's his business. Now, back to the policy side. Uh, what I think we should do, and that's why I said designations are good, but not enough. What I would like to see us, America, do is to construct this global coalition, the same way we did during the Cold War. And a coalition that looks at Islamism as a menace to the Western founding ideas and ideologies, and to confront Islamism the same way we confronted Marxism and communism, regardless of, who's peddling, who's trafficking in these ideas, whether it's a government or an organization or a political party. We just put them all together and we say, okay, if you are endorsing or propagating or supporting this ideology, then you have a problem with us. If Hayvi, probably I know, all immigrants know, anyone who has applied to a visa to the US in the past, one of the main questions were, have you ever joined a communist party? And I don't see why we shouldn't have the same question. Have you ever joined an Islamist organization? We should be fighting this. And at the same time, like we said, we should make the difference that our war on Islamism is not a war on Islam or Muslims. You know, Islam is a religion that we respect, like we respect all other religions. Muslims are people that are like us and like everybody else. We respect them. We have a war on Islamism, on bringing Islam to government and making it government itself. And anyone who endorses this idea that it's our ally Qatar or Turkey or, you know, our enemy Iran, we will treat you similarly. We will go after you, we will impose sanctions, we will counter you. We will have soft power, just like you have soft power to counter your soft power. Behind the scenes war, you know, like the one you used to have with the Soviet Union at the time. Because as you know, the Islamists more often than not go after pro democracy and pro liberty activists, whether in Beirut or in Tehran or, you know, more often than not. You know that Putin have people flying out of windows in Moscow, and you know in Iran and the Islamists do the same. You know, Erdogan threw his opponent in prison. I just don't understand how how do we America see this and not say anything. You know, I think one of our diplomats in the region said that the best solution for the region is a benevolent monarch, and this really shook me to the core as an
What does
American.
that mean? Can you explain that?
Well, I think he had a Look, he probably heard a different expression and he couldn't remember it. There was a debate in the 1800s, in 1900s, during the end of the Ottoman Empire, where many Muslims or even around the world started saying, well, maybe democracy is not the best way. Maybe an enlightened despot is the best government we could have. So the idea that you have a despot, as long as this despot is really patriotic and wants to, you know, open schools and healthcare and take care of his people. So even if he's a despot, why knock him out? The Our diplomat, the word he used was a benevolent monarch, and I think he had Shara in mind, thinking that, you know, let's have an autocrat, let's have a single person who rules Syria forever without democracy and without anything else, because this is the only. And he said this is the only model that worked in the Middle East, which made me think, look, we had despots. Look at Assad, look at Saddam. How did that go for the Middle Easterners? So anyway, but the fact that an American official would say such a thing, we, America, our whole existence as a country, as an experiment, our republic is built on the idea that we stood up to the monarch and we said no, and we said that people should be represented in government. We are the champions of representative government on this planet. And now comes a time when some of our diplomats are saying, yeah, let's go to monarchy. You know, I think you guys, that's what you deserve. So look, I'm not advocating for going after monarchs and toppling them and building states. But I'm just saying this doesn't mean that we say, okay, yeah, monarchs are nice or they're good. No, just don't say it. Just don't support them. Just sit back and wait until a good time comes when we can really support representative government.
Mhm. Um, a lot of really interesting points you've brought about, you know, all of this change that is happening, you know, here in the Middle East. Now we know that the US is obviously just less interested in being as involved, right, in the Middle East, especially under President Trump. But that's just a general trajectory, right? I want to talk about Lebanon if with the time we have left. We have a few more minutes, right? And we know that on the ground in the Middle East, the one country that is confronting these terrorist organizations is Israel. Okay. And because of that, we have this weakening that has happened to all of these different terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah. Of course, in Syria, we saw that they were completely dismantled, but now we have a different issue in Syria, and that's for a different show. But now in Lebanon, what is going on with Hezbollah today? What do you think could happen now that the Lebanese government is talking about disarming Hezbollah? I know that the deadline that the US put for Lebanon is literally in few days to be completely have disarmed Hezbollah. I personally don't think that's going to happen. You know, but there is a change. There is a change. You see, even in the people, how they're talking about peace with Israel, how they are anti-Hezbollah very openly. They're not as afraid anymore. You see a shift in the balance of powers in Lebanon, which is really good, really hopeful for the people in Lebanon in general. But of course, you still have Hezbollah that's still there. You still have the Shiite in the areas that are controlled by Hezbollah that also are struggling because of Hezbollah. I mean, this is reality. We saw like a lot of people are talking about, about Hezbollah, that they're not getting whatever money, that they were supposed to get, their homes, because Hezbollah will not leave their areas, will not take out the military and the warehouses of their weapons that they have there. It's a complicated issue. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on in Lebanon today?
Sure. So to the first part of your question, whether the United States is pulling out of the Middle East and the world or not, there's a faction inside the Republican Party that is now putting out or supporting isolationism. They say, we have two oceans. There's no reason for us. We're a big country, prosperous country. Let the world figure it out for themselves.
What happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. That's definitely a lesson.
No, but even before we go to the Middle East, look, if you want to do that, fine. But we can't really do that, and at the same time, declare Qatar as our best ally, give them more defense agreements, and brag that we've ended 7 or 8 wars, and be involved in so many things. So we have to decide if we're pulling out of the world, which I think would be a big mistake. We pull out of all the world, but we can't say let's pull out of the world. See you, Israel. It has been a good run of friendship, but we're not doing this anymore. While at the same time giving the Qataris something that looks like NATO's Article 5, that if anyone attacks Qatar would be defending them. So we have to be consistent. That's what I'm saying. And this said, I prefer that we remain engaged on the world stage. Our engagement gives us a lot of perks that some might not appreciate, but this might include, look, the dollar is the global currency reserve. Why is that? Because the whole world trusts the U.S. government on global affairs. And there are so many other perks that we don't have enough time to explain this right now. Now, going to Lebanon, what's happening in Lebanon is that you have small countries and you have big players. And Lebanon happens to be one of the small countries where big players try to just grab it and put it under the thumb from time to time. Lebanon had been under the thumb of the Iranian Islamist empire for the past 20 years. Hezbollah being a real threat to the state of Israel. 150,000 missiles, they could really hit Israel hard. And they really kept Israel away from confronting Iran, because Israel always thought if we go after Iran, maybe Hezbollah will start throwing their rockets at us. Now, Hezbollah launched a war after October 7 in support of Gaza and Hamas, and Israel prevailed. They scored a marvelous victory, crushing Hezbollah, taking Hezbollah from 100% before war to 20% by the time Hezbollah agreed to sign the cessation of hostilities. And Hezbollah was so bruised that when it signed, and I say Hezbollah, I mean Hezbollah, I don't mean really the guys who are in government now in Lebanon were elected after Lebanon signed the cessation of hostilities. So before that, you had Najib Mikati as the acting prime minister, and you had Speaker Berry, who's Hezbollah's ally, and you had a government with Hezbollah ministers in it. And these guys signed on the cessation of hostilities in November 2024. And this clearly stated that if the war stops, Hezbollah will surrender its arms to the Lebanese government, and there'll be no armed militias outside of the Lebanese armed forces, the police, and the border patrol. And they named them like 6 government agencies, and Hezbollah signed on that. Now, after that, Lebanon elected a president, Joseph Aoun, designated a prime minister, Nawaf Salam, formed a new cabinet. And now when these guys came to implement the cessation of hostilities, Hezbollah stepped back and started saying, oh, no, you guys are doing America's bidding. And you're thinking of it, but you signed on the commitment. I mean, why commit if you, we're doing what you said, what you guys said.
Mean nothing.
Exactly. So, of course, it doesn't Hezbollah. Hezbollah is wily and, a bunch of charlatans who are trying to hide behind others. So what you have now is Hezbollah is trying to get out of its commitment. So Hezbollah, one of the ways that they think they could get out of their commitment is to say that the cessation of hostilities says that we get disarmed only south of River Litani. River Litani is 22 miles, 32 kilometers, 20 miles roughly from the border with Israel. And this region, south of Lebanon, is supposed to be disarmed. And then after that, the Lebanese army is supposed to disarm Hezbollah through the rest of Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah is saying, no, the agreement says only this region. The rest of Lebanon is not included. So, you know, we give you, or we concede this part of Lebanon, but then we keep our militia in the rest of the country. Of course, Israel is not sitting back and watching. And Israel knows that the Lebanese government is weaker than Hezbollah. So since the cessation of hostility, Israel has been practicing what it calls maintenance strikes to make sure that Hezbollah remains at 20% of its strength. And while Israel has been policing, Iran and Hezbollah they've increased their rate of armament of Hezbollah. So now they started outpacing both Israel's strikes and the Lebanese armed forces' effort to take over arms depots, demine segments of the south, and and whatnot, and take over, uh, um, to control the territory from Hezbollah. Where we are now is that uh, the area south of Litani is probably 80%, 90%, God knows, but is to a great extent disarmed. And the Lebanese government will announce probably in the coming few days before the end of the year, they will announce that this area is now clear of any militias, foreign or domestic. And Hezbollah will also say that south of Litani. And Hezbollah will also say that they do not exist south of Litani anymore. That's what rumors are saying. But Hezbollah will also say this completes our compliance and commitment, and from now on, good luck. Everyone goes their way. But the Lebanese government had said that this is only the first part of the plan. They have a plan with 5 phases, and they divided Lebanon into 5 regions. And after this phase comes the phase right to its north, which is the region between River Litani and River Awali. And this is also a heavy, there's a lot of Hezbollah heavy arms there. And after that, they move to the Biqa and then to the southern suburb, and so they have a whole system. So now we see a gap that's opening up between the state and Hezbollah. When Hezbollah says this completes the compliance part, and we're done, and when the government keeps on saying no, we're going on, I'm thinking that we'll probably have some sort of big disagreement between the two. And meanwhile, everyone expects, including the Lebanese, of course, they expect Israel to step up its maintenance strikes, its policing of Hezbollah. And if this happens, either Hezbollah returns fire, and there might be we go back to war before the cessation of hostilities, or Hezbollah will have to suck it up and hope that with time something changes in the U.S. or somewhere else. But this is where we are now. Now, to your last point, you are very correct that Lebanon today, the number of people who are coming out and saying, let's talk about peace, including the president of Lebanon, who sent a delegate, a civilian, to talk face to face with an Israeli civilian, government official, which is a huge issue. On Lebanese territory, by the way. This was happening on Naqoura, which is inside. You just cross the border, and then you're on the Lebanese side.
Peace talks, basically.
Yes. So this is, and they've had 2 rounds already: December 3, December 19, and now we have the third one coming in January 9. If the third one happens, this will put Lebanon ahead of every other Arab country in face-to-face talks with Israel, other than the governments that have peace with Israel. Like Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. So you have 5 countries with peace deals. Lebanon will be number 6 in terms of face-to-face talks with Israel. I hear now that this one person who's meeting with the Israeli side will be the number will be beefed up. So now we would probably have this person as a Christian Maronite, small karam. So now they're thinking of adding a Shia and a Sunni, which is what represents the Lebanese leadership.
Wow.
So now you'll have 3 people who are talking, and of course the Israeli side will have to also add 2 other officials. And they're saying that what they're discussing has nothing to do with the military. They're discussing economic security, how to send people on both sides of the border back to their houses and to live in peace. So all of this is new. All of this is not acceptable to Iran and Hezbollah and the Muslim Brotherhood and Qatar. They don't like this. They don't like it. So I think as long as the Lebanese president is doing what he's doing now, I think it's only fair that we support him. Now, I disagree with him so many times. You know me, I'm a loud and noisy guy, and
Yeah.
so often I just go after a statement he gives here or there. But this doesn't mean that, we have to give him credit where it is due, and we have to show him support
Absolutely.
as long as he's doing what he's doing.
Mhm. What about the deadline by the US in terms of, like, do you think that we're just heading towards more direct negotiations? Hezbollah basically going a step forward or backwards in their, kind of where they're positioned, right? But in terms of complying with what the US is asking for. What about any confrontations that will eventually have to happen between the Lebanese military and Hezbollah if things maybe stall? Because the US is applying a lot. I mean, there's a lot of the diplomatic efforts by the US, but there's also clear consequence to Lebanon if things don't move in that direction, including economics. I mean, there's a multiple layers here too into what could happen if that is not the case.
So look, if Hezbollah retaliates, if Israel intensifies and Hezbollah retaliates and we go to war, this will just stop all the talks. I mean, because the Lebanese will stop talking to Israel in case the war becomes full scale.
Mhm.
And this means that Hezbollah has an interest in escalation. But at the same time, the partisans of Hezbollah, the Shia partisans of Hezbollah, are so bruised. They haven't even returned to their houses and villages, and they're still living in
They're angry.
displacement.
Mhm.
Very angry. And Hezbollah knows that these guys are not really in the mood for renewal of fighting and shelling
And also, Hezbollah would be destroyed further by Israel. I mean, that's
it is, look, it will be weakened, even though we all know that there will be at least 5 to 10% of Hezbollah that only the Lebanese can take out.
yeah.
So at a certain point, short of Israel invading Lebanon, which no one thinks that Israel wants to do,
Mhm.
short of invading Lebanon, there'll be 5 to 10% of Hezbollah that only the Lebanese can take out, and this is what the Lebanese should be doing, and this is what they seem to be trying to do. But if you are Hezbollah now, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you go to war, the Shia will be angrier, and you know that no money is coming to, because they haven't reconstructed what they've lost over the past year.
Mhm.
So they either weaken themselves with the Shia by going to war with Israel, or they don't go to war with Israel, and the state keeps on improving talks to Israel and taking over more of Hezbollah's armament. So they're not really in a place where they think that they can change things. The only thing that we know is that Iran is trying to rearm Hezbollah as fast as possible, hoping that at one point, if Israel decides to go after the ballistic missile program of Iran, that Hezbollah will be ready to threaten Israel. So, in the Iranian thinking, if Hezbollah is ready to check Israel, that will probably deter Israel from going after Iran. And this is why you see uh, uh, you know, uh, uh, why Iran is just trying to make things happen fast, even
Yeah,
faster
so
than Hezbollah
Iran is
can talk.
betting on Hezbollah basically getting Israel distracted while they're working on their ballistic missile programs. They also have their own nuclear programs that are still somewhat intact in some places. I mean, it's not completely gone, right? So that's what Iran is betting on, is to continue having its own proxies, go to war basically with Israel, fight with Israel. So Israel wouldn't look their way.
I,
That's what
I
they're
think
looking for.
I think Iran and Hezbollah, but mainly Iran, they probably missed the memo that after October 7, Israel's tolerance to risk has gone down drastically, and Israel is not in the mood of containing enemies anymore. It just wants to take them out before before they cross any threshold of threat against Israel.
Mhm.
So the Iranians, they're probably waiting. They're trying to rebuild their capabilities, especially the ballistic missile program. But I think many experts think that the Israelis have not yet touched the uranium that's under the rubble. They haven't moved the rubble over from the enriched uranium, and if they're not moving it, it doesn't mean that they will not moving ever. They're probably waiting until a friendly president comes to the White House, maybe when things change in Europe, I mean, these guys they hedge, they wait, they bet, they duck, they had
They're always waiting.
right, and they look. They sometimes they understand that they have to hunker down. Assad used to do this all the time. The father and the son, they hunker down. They think, listen, maybe the White House is not friendly. Maybe you hunker down, you wait. Yeah, White House will change eventually. We get friendlier president. Things might change in Israel too. We get a stronger hand, then we go back to where we were. So this is the Iranian calculus. I'm not sure whether they're aware that Israel this time is not in the mood of going back to the old way of, okay, mowing the lawn, beating you down, then you bounce back up, then I beat you down again. You know, uh, I mean, I think this is where Israel is now. No one knows for how long Israel will be here. Maybe one point Israel would think, okay, maybe we should go back to the mowing the lawn. But at this point, no one thinks that Israel is in the mood of mowing the lawn.
Yeah, especially I mean under the leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's not willing to mow the lawn anymore because of the October 7th and what happened.
Well, I think the Israeli population at large is, yeah, I mean, after October 7, there's probably the majority of Israelis think that they shouldn't wait until danger comes to them. They should take it out first. And I think it'll be really good for us in the United States to understand that Israel is a valuable ally, and it really serves a lot of our national American interest, whether it's through intel sharing, whether through reliability, even whether through the population. Listen, you look at all these nations of the earth, just show me one time that the Israeli population, not the politicians, like regular people, just show me one time when an Israeli said something bad about America other than, we love the United States, our best ally and friend.
Yeah.
So we get friendship, we get intelligence sharing, we get reliability, we get everything.
And even towards Arabs, I mean, that's the one thing people don't know. Like, Israelis, the vast majority of Israelis are all about peace with Arabs. And
Exactly.
the animosity is coming from the other side.
So I think, look, we, America, I don't think we've been helping out I mean, we help them from time to time, like we did during the war on Iran. But really, the Israelis expend so much blood and treasure, and then we show up and say, okay, now we end the wars, and we tend to just act on a faster pace. We want quick wins in this town because our system and design in such a political way that we have to
40 years the administration, and then you start thinking about the next elections and all this. Yeah,
the Israelis can't really work on our news cycle schedule. They have to be more strategic. They have to be more comprehensive. When they knock out enemy, they have to make sure that they knocked out enemies, not really just weaken them and call it victory and plan of the whatever peace of the century or whatever you want to call it.
Of course, there's so much more to talk about. We haven't even, I feel like we talked about different really important issues, which I believe is going to be so interesting and informative for our audience. But we would love to have you on again in the future to continue this conversation and talk about all the developments. It's always wonderful to have you, Hussain. You bring so much knowledge and experience to our audience every time.
Thank you, Hayvi. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much all for listening and watching us on Middle East Breakdown on ME24. I would love to see you guys follow us and share our content. And please give us great ratings on whatever you use to listen to your podcasts. And also follow us on X, Instagram, and YouTube. And see you next week.